What happens when the boss secretly returns to his own store and discovers that every employee is living in fear? The sleek black card shimmered in Ethan Grayson's hand, reflecting exactly who he was: powerful, sharp, and unpredictable. But at this moment, standing in a cramped kitchen, thick with the smell of frying oil, that power seemed to vanish when a soft, trembling voice spoke, as if afraid of its own sound. "I'm sorry. Your card was declined." Maya, the young cashier with her hair tied neatly back, kept her eyes lowered, as if she didn't dare meet the gaze of the customer standing before her. Ethan tilted his head slightly, observing her quietly, not with the look of an impatient customer, but with the calm focus of a man searching for an answer to a much bigger question. What was really happening here? He gave her a faint smile, the kind of smile that, to anyone who didn't know him, might look like polite acceptance from a reasonable customer. "It's all right. I'll pay in cash," Ethan said, his voice deep and warm, enough to make Maya exhale in relief, as if she had just avoided a storm. But in that exact moment, a chain of calculations started running in Ethan's mind. He hadn't come here for a burger. He had come to listen, to watch, and to feel things that no financial report could ever reveal. Maya quickly took the money, handed him the receipt, but her hands were trembling so badly that her fingers brushed against each other with the faint whisper of fear. And Ethan heard it, not with his ears, but with the intuition of a man who had built an entire empire from nothing. He left the counter, carrying his tray to a corner seat, choosing a spot hidden from direct view, but perfect for observing the entire restaurant. What he saw didn't look like any Grayson's Burger location he had ever known. The place was packed, every table filled, the kitchen working non-stop. Yet the only thing present in the air was an eerie silence. No laughter, no conversations, not even a single thank you exchanged. Only the hiss of hot oil and the hollow beeping of the register broke the quiet. Behind the counter, Damien, the shift manager, stood with his arms crossed, his cold stare as sharp as a blade, tracking Maya's every move. He didn't need to speak or give orders. One glance from him was enough to make Maya bow her head lower, her lips pressed tightly together, the forced smile glued to her face. Ethan watched it all, his eyes narrowing slightly. A habit everyone who worked with him knew well. This was the sign he was memorizing every detail. A restaurant was never this quiet, not unless something was suppressing every single person inside it. He took a sip of soda, set the cup down on the table, the soft clink sounding louder than usual in the tense silence. Ethan didn't rush, didn't show a single hint of what was on his mind. To everyone here, he was just an ordinary middle-aged customer having dinner. But only he knew that the real investigation had already begun, the very moment Maya told him his card had been declined, and what he was after wasn't the burger on his tray, but the truth hidden behind forced smiles and fearful eyes. Ethan sat quietly in the corner of the restaurant, his eyes missing nothing. Maya continued working with a smile fixed firmly on her face, but it looked more like a mask glued in place, never changing no matter what customers said or did. Her fingers trembled slightly each time she tapped the touchscreen, her shoulders tensing as if bracing for a reprimand that could come at any moment. Ethan had met many employees across his chain of stores, but he had never seen eyes like Maya's. Eyes of someone trying to survive rather than simply do their job. A small sound broke the tension, the crash of a glass slipping from a young employee's hand and shattering into tiny shards on the floor. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Damien didn't yell. He didn't need to. He simply turned his head, his icy gaze cutting across the boy like a blade. One look was enough. The boy instantly dropped his head, mumbling a shaky, "I'm sorry," like a criminal awaiting punishment, his shoulders trembling as if the weight of a shadow had fallen over him. The air grew thick, almost suffocating, as if every sound was swallowed by Damien's presence. Ethan's eyes narrowed. What he had just witnessed wasn't discipline. It was control built entirely on fear. Ethan lifted his glass, took a slow sip, his gaze settling on Damien. The man stood rigid, arms crossed, unmoving. Yet with just the furrow of a brow, he commanded the entire room. No employees dared speak to one another. No one smiled. No one even looked up from their work. They weren't people in a warm, welcoming restaurant anymore. They were machines operating in a factory, each motion stripped of life. Maya handed a tray to a customer, her smile still frozen, but Ethan noticed something different now. Her eyes had lost all light. They were empty, as if she had learned not to feel, only to obey, doing whatever was required to avoid trouble. Ethan set his tray down, his fingers tapping lightly against the wooden table in a slow, steady rhythm. Each tap was a question in his mind. How had a store once filled with laughter turned into this? Who had turned it into a place where silence felt safer than speaking? He knew the answer wouldn't come tonight, but one thing was certain. This wasn't accidental. Someone had deliberately built this atmosphere of fear, and Ethan intended to find out who. His quiet investigation continued, every glance and every movement stored in his memory, like the first pieces of a much darker puzzle than any internal report had ever revealed. The next morning, Ethan returned to the very same restaurant, dressed casually like any other middle-aged customer. He chose the same corner seat, ordering the exact same meal as before. Maya noticed him, a brief flicker of unease crossing her face before she quickly masked it, her forced smile remaining in place, her eyes avoiding his for more than a second. Ethan gave her a polite nod, returning the gesture with a faint, courteous smile. But inside, he was observing every detail with the precision of a detective piecing together a puzzle. The restaurant was just as busy as the previous day, yet the atmosphere hadn't changed, silent, tense, as if every person moved according to a programmed rhythm. The entire place felt more like an assembly line than the restaurant that had once proudly carried the motto, "Serving with heart." But what drew Ethan's attention the most was Damien. The man didn't need to speak or touch anything, but every time he stepped from the kitchen to the counter, the tempo shifted instantly. The employees stopped looking at each other, their movements becoming sharper and faster, as though even a second of hesitation could bring consequences they all feared. Ethan unfolded his napkin, discreetly revealing a pen hidden underneath. He began jotting down quick notes, his eyes still scanning the room without pause. The words, hurried yet legible, captured the truth he was witnessing. No laughter, no communication. Every action driven by fear. He took a sip of his soda, his expression calm, betraying nothing. But inside him, frustration simmered hotter with every passing moment. He had built this chain out of love for people, and now it was being ruled by someone who used fear as a weapon. When Damien disappeared back into the kitchen, Ethan followed him with his gaze, narrowing his eyes slightly. He knew one thing. Fear didn't grow on its own. It was planted deliberately. And if he wanted to change this, he had to find the one truly responsible for it, someone far more dangerous than just Damien. Folding the napkin neatly and slipping the pen back into his pocket, Ethan's eyes flashed with quiet determination. Today was only the beginning. But he was ready to dig deeper, even if it meant uncovering secrets that many would rather keep buried forever. Ethan sat in the corner of the restaurant, his hand slowly rotating the glass of water, his eyes following every movement of the staff like a chess player calculating each move. Suddenly, a scene caught all of his attention. Liam, the young employee who had only been working for a few days, still carried the spark of enthusiasm typical of someone new to the job. He stepped up to the cashier counter with eagerness, but Damien emerged from the kitchen, his movements slow, his face devoid of expression. He stopped directly behind Liam, his voice as cold and sharp as steel. "You're not on the register today. Go clean the bathrooms now." Liam hesitated, his voice quiet, almost unsure. "But I was assigned to the register this morning." Damien didn't even look at him, cutting him off with a flat and final response. "You thought wrong." For a brief second, resistance flickered in Liam's expression, but it vanished instantly when his eyes scanned the room, meeting only the lowered gazes of his colleagues. No one spoke. No one dared to make eye contact. The silence in the room was thick, as if everyone had long accepted the unspoken rule. Don't push back if you want to keep your name on the schedule. Liam swallowed hard, his shoulders slumping, placing the cleaning cloth on the counter before walking quietly toward the dark hallway that led to the bathrooms. Ethan followed his steps with narrowed eyes. At that moment, he didn't just see a new employee being given an unfair task. He saw an entire system built to crush people like Liam, young workers who hadn't yet had the chance to build confidence in their jobs, but were already learning to submit through fear. 15 minutes later, Liam returned, his hands red and raw from harsh cleaning chemicals, his shirt stained with water, his steps heavy. As Liam passed by, Ethan leaned slightly toward him, his voice soft, almost like offering comfort. "Rough day, huh?" Liam gave a bitter half smile, one far too jaded for someone his age. "They call it training, but I think it's just a way to see how fast they can break you." Ethan didn't respond, only nodding slightly. But inside, Liam's words echoed like an accusation. A management system built on fear couldn't exist without someone higher up protecting it, and Damien was only one piece of the chain. Ethan leaned back in his chair, his fingers tapping a slow rhythm on the wooden table, his eyes glinting with determination. He understood now. If he wanted to change things, he had to find the person who designed this system, and he wouldn't stop until it was torn down, even if it meant going up against people far more powerful than Damien. His quiet investigation had just turned a page, moving deeper and into more dangerous territory. But Ethan had never been the kind of man to know fear. That afternoon, the restaurant was still packed, but the heavy atmosphere hadn't changed. Ethan sat silently in the corner, his eyes scanning everything like a precision instrument. He stood up, pretending to grab extra sauce and napkins. His steps were slow and casual. No one paid him any attention, but every movement was calculated. As he passed the hallway leading to the staff break room, his eyes stopped for a single second, just long enough to catch what he was looking for. On the white, painted wall, a timesheet was neatly posted, the handwriting precise and sharp, each number written with an unusual level of care. Ethan slowed his pace, pretending to study the menu posted nearby, but his eyes flicked quickly across each line. Maya's name stood out, her recorded hours showing only 5 hours a day. Ethan tilted his head slightly, the corner of his mouth curling just barely, almost imperceptibly. He knew Maya had worked nearly the entire shift, at least 9 hours, and he had personally watched her barely stop for a single moment. A normal mistake might show small discrepancies, but this was intentional. The handwriting, straight, perfectly aligned, belonged to someone used to keeping books. Damien. Ethan lowered his head, pretending to reach for a napkin, but instead slipped his phone from his pocket. A quiet click sounded as he took a photo of the paper, quick and discreet enough that no one noticed. He tucked the phone away and returned to his table as if he had never stopped. Sitting down, Ethan exhaled softly, not from fear, but from the anger tightening in his chest. He had built this chain to create a fair workplace, a place where every employee mattered. And now, his name was being used as a shield by those stealing from the people who worked the hardest. Ethan looked toward the counter where Maya still wore that forced smile, her hands moving quickly over the register. She had no idea that the numbers on that wall were quietly stealing her sweat and effort. He placed his hand on the table, his fingers tapping a steady rhythm like the ticking of a countdown. Every tap was a silent promise. This truth would not stay buried. The photo on his phone wasn't just proof of a falsified timesheet. It was a door to a much bigger secret. Ethan knew that if Damien was bold enough to do this, there had to be more hidden underneath. And he was ready to drag it all into the light, no matter who he had to confront to get there. Ethan sat still in the corner of the restaurant, his eyes moving slowly, missing nothing. In the kitchen, among the bowed heads, filled with fear, one man caught his attention. Arthur, the head chef. He worked with a calm, deliberate rhythm that stood out in this tense environment. Every time Damien walked by, the other employees immediately lowered their heads or sped up their movements. But Arthur never changed his pace. His every motion was careful and precise, as if Damien's presence had nothing to do with him. Ethan narrowed his eyes, sensing he had found an important piece of the puzzle. Waiting for the right moment, Ethan stood when Arthur came closer to the counter, pretending to admire the food before lowering his voice. "You're very skilled. You must have been here a long time." Arthur glanced at him, his eyes calm but carrying something deeper, then gave a slight nod. 4 years. Ethan's tone dropped further, as if asking a casual question. "Have you ever seen Damien take money from the register?" Arthur didn't answer immediately. His hands continued wrapping a burger with perfect precision. every motion almost artistic. After a moment, he spoke, his voice even and quiet. 3 times. Once last Friday night, twice this week. He always says it's to balance the cash, but I've never seen him record it in the books. Ethan tilted his head, his gaze sharpening. No one's reported it. Arthur paused, this time turning his head fully to look at Ethan. His calm eyes carried the weight of long, suppressed fatigue. Anyone who speaks up disappears from the schedule the following week. Everyone knows that. With that, Arthur turned back to his work, as if the conversation had never happened. Ethan stood there for a moment, before nodding slightly and returning to his table. He picked up his glass of water but didn't drink, instead staring at the reflection of the kitchen counter in the polished wooden surface. Arthur wasn't the type to talk easily, and if he had dared to speak, the truth was far bigger than anyone imagined. Ethan's grip tightened around the glass, determination building inside him. He wasn't just collecting evidence anymore. He had a witness. And if Arthur, the only man who didn't bow his head to Damien, was willing to stand with him, this fight would no longer be just a quiet investigation. It was about to become something much bigger. That night, the small hotel room was bathed in soft golden light, but to Ethan, everything felt cloaked in a cold grey hue. He sat in front of his laptop, fingers moving swiftly across the keyboard, his sharp gaze fixed on the screen. Report after report filled the display, numbers that might seem normal to anyone else. But to a man who had built an entire empire from scratch, even the slightest inconsistency was a warning sign. Ethan began filtering the data, branch by branch, cross-referencing revenue, work hours, and payroll records. Slowly, the truth emerged, like a dark painting revealed under a harsh light. Houston, where he was sitting now, was only the surface. Dallas, San Antonio, Baton Rouge, even Little Rock, all showed the same irregular patterns. Employee work hours slashed without justification, payrolls manually altered, revenue reports consistently lower than reality. Every manipulated entry bore the same signature. On every line of approval, the name proved uninterpreted by R. Vance, repeated like a stamp of guilt. Roy Vance, the regional director Ethan had once trusted with overseeing dozens of branches, was the architect behind a system of blatant theft. Ethan leaned back in his chair, hands clasped together, his eyes locked on the screen. He thought of the employees forced to work in silence, of Maya with her forced smile, of Liam with his reddened hands from scrubbing floors, of Arthur, the only man who refused to bow his head but still had to remain silent to survive. Ethan took a deep breath, anger boiling quietly inside him. He would never allow his name, or the principles he had built Grayson's Burger upon, to be used as a shield for someone like Roy Vance. He opened a new folder on his laptop, meticulously saving every piece of evidence. Payroll logs, lists of unjustified hour cuts, records of suspicious manual changes. Each click of the mouse was like a hammer striking at the rotten machinery Roy had created. Ethan's eyes hardened with the same determination that had carried him through the toughest business battles, the eyes of a man who had never backed down from any power. Outside the window, The city lights flickered and traffic moved as if nothing had changed. But in that room, Ethan knew a storm was about to break. And this time, he wasn't just stopping a single corrupt branch. He was going to uproot the entire machine that had turned a dream into a nightmare for honest people. This was no longer an internal investigation. This was going to be a war. The next morning, Ethan returned to the restaurant with the calm demeanor of a regular customer. He sat in the same corner as before, but this time he didn't glance at the cashier or the kitchen. His eyes were fixed, waiting for the exact moment Damien left. Near the end of the morning shift, Damien stepped into the back office, leaving behind a rare pocket of space where the atmosphere seemed just slightly less suffocating. Ethan stood up and walked slowly toward the small break room, where Maya sat hunched over in a chair, scrolling through her phone. She flinched when he appeared, her expression anxious. I'm not supposed to talk to customers," she whispered, her voice so soft it was barely more than a breath. Ethan sat down across from her, lowering his voice, his eyes meeting hers, not harsh but steady enough that she couldn't look away. "I believe you," he said slowly, each word carrying the weight of a promise. "If you want things to change, now is the time." Maya stayed silent, her hand gripping her phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. Her gaze drifted as if she was fighting a battle inside herself. In that moment, Ethan understood she wasn't just afraid of losing her job. She was afraid of something much bigger, being crushed by a system she had no way to fight against. But then her eyes began to glisten, and the silence cracked like a wall breaking apart. Her voice trembled as she unlocked her phone and handed it to him. "I've kept these for months," she said, her words shaking. On the screen were photos of time cards and pay stubs, evidence of hours unfairly cut. Every week, they take almost $70. Not enough for anyone to notice, but enough to wear us down. I didn't know if anyone would ever believe me, but I kept them anyway. A tear slipped down onto the screen, and Maya quickly wiped it away, giving a faint, bitter smile. I just wanted to work honestly, but here, being honest doesn't feed you. Ethan took the phone, his gaze softening, his voice low and firm. "I believe you. And this time, the truth will come to light." Maya looked at him, her eyes shimmering, and for the first time, there was a spark of hope in them. She nodded slightly, her hands loosening as if releasing a weight she had carried for months. Ethan handed the phone back, but something in his eyes had changed. He was no longer just a man searching for evidence. He was a man carrying the responsibility for everyone who had been forced into silence. And he knew that now, with someone like Maya willing to stand up, nothing could stop the truth from breaking wide open. That afternoon, the parking lot behind the restaurant was silent. The only sound was the wind slipping between rows of parked cars. Ethan leaned casually against his rental car, hands in his jacket pockets, his eyes fixed on the back door. A few minutes later, Arthur appeared, his steps slow but his gaze unyielding. He glanced around, making sure no one was watching, then walked toward Ethan. In his hand was a small USB drive, clutched tightly between his fingers, as if it held enough weight to burn the entire system down. "I shouldn't be keeping this," Arthur said quietly, his voice low but firm. but I copied it before the system auto erased it. Kitchen cameras, 2 weeks ago. Damien opened the safe, took the cash, didn't log a thing. Ethan reached out, taking the USB, his fingers closing tightly around it, like he had just secured the most crucial piece of a puzzle he had been piecing together. He looked straight at Arthur, his voice steady and resolute. "You just saved everyone in this store." Arthur didn't answer, only let out a tired sigh, his eyes drifting away, as if carrying the weight of years of silence. He lit a cigarette, the smoke curling into the air, and said, his voice dropping even lower, "I'm just tired of watching good people get crushed." Ethan studied the man in front of him, and for a moment he felt the sincerity in Arthur's words. This wasn't for himself. Arthur was doing this for the younger employees, forced to bow their heads every day, like Maya, like Liam. That night, in his hotel room, Ethan sat at the desk, his laptop open, files neatly arranged. He connected the USB, and frame by frame, the evidence appeared on the screen. Damien opening the safe, counting the money, shoving it directly into his pocket with no notes, no bookkeeping, nothing. Ethan documented everything carefully, saving it into a secured file and immediately sending it to Eleanor Pierce, the senior financial director of the entire chain. But he knew this wouldn't be enough to take down an entire rotten system. He needed a stronger blow, one that would end it completely. Ethan picked up his phone, scrolling through his contacts until he stopped at a name he hadn't dialed in a long time. Clara Monroe. He pressed call, his voice calm but unyielding. "Clara, it's Ethan. I know you were forced out last year for exposing fraud. I won't let that happen again. I need you." There was silence on the other end for a few seconds. Then Clara's voice came through, soft but steady. "I still have Roy Vance's emails. You'll have them tomorrow." Ethan leaned back in his chair, his eyes glinting with determination. The final pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. The fight had officially begun, and this time he would see it through to the end, not just to save the employees who had been trampled on, but to bring down the entire system that had built its power on crushing their hard work. That morning, the air in the top-floor conference room of headquarters was as tense as a tightened wire. The cold light reflected off the polished wooden table where Roy Vance, the regional director who once confidently controlled dozens of branches, sat with his usual arrogance. The door opened, and Ethan walked in, his demeanor calm, but his eyes sharp as a blade. He didn't sit down. Instead, he placed a thick file right in front of Roy. The sharp thud as it hit the table shattered the heavy silence. Roy looked up, smirking with a condescending sneer. "You think you can take me down with a few sheets of paper? Ethan, this is business, not some moral game." Ethan didn't answer immediately. His eyes locked on Roy as if he could cut through the mask of confidence. Then he opened the file, page after page, revealed clearly before Roy's eyes. Timesheets with cut hours, falsified payroll records, photos of Damien stealing cash from the safe, and finally, an email signed directly by Roy Vance. Evidence that couldn't be denied. "This isn't just paperwork," Ethan said, his voice low, but each word landed like a hammer. "This is the sweat and tears of the people you stole from. People you turned into tools for your own profit." For a brief moment, Roy lost his calm, his fingers tapping lightly on the table as if trying to steady himself. But Ethan didn't give him a chance to speak. "I will take this to the press, to the courts. I don't care how much power you think you have behind you. This isn't business anymore. This is justice, and you will pay for what you've done." The air in the room seemed to freeze. Roy's eyes flickered with uncertainty before he looked away, unable to meet Ethan's unwavering gaze. In that silence, the answer was clear. Roy knew he had lost. The next day, the media exploded. Headlines spread across every major outlet. CEO Ethan Grayson personally investigates. Fires regional director Roy Vance. Fraud system exposed. The entire employee community erupted with excitement. Maya was promoted to assistant manager. Arthur became the lead trainer for management, based on respect rather than fear. Liam, the young employee once forced into dirty work, was publicly commended for his perseverance. In a live, streamed company-wide meeting, Ethan stood before thousands of employees, his voice deep and filled with emotion. "I was silent before, and that silence hurt you. But from today, no voice will go unheard. Grayson's burger doesn't belong to me. It belongs to every single one of you who puts in the work, every day." In the front row, Maya smiled through tears. Arthur nodded in satisfaction, and Liam looked up at the stage with eyes full of hope. Ethan nodded back gently, feeling lighter than he had in a long time. He had kept his promise. And this was the beginning of something new. A Grayson's burger built not just on recipes, but on respect and the trust every person deserved. In business, profit can be built through strategy, but trust can only be maintained through fairness and respect for people. Ethan's story shows us that a system is truly sustainable only when the people working within it are heard and valued. If you agree that no one deserves to be silenced or oppressed just because they are weaker, hit like and subscribe to help spread these positive values. And don't forget to leave a comment with exactly 3 words, "I agree." So we know you also believe that justice always begins with the smallest actions.